My name is Valentina. I'm 38 years old, a single mother living in Boulder, Colorado, with my 10-year-old son, Ethan. One seemingly ordinary Monday afternoon, while working at the small accounting office where I'd spent the past 8 years, an email notification popped up, and everything inside me collapsed. I'm sorry. I've fallen in love with someone else and I'm starting a new life with her. I read that line over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. But no, it was from Chad, my husband, the man I had shared 11 years of my life with. The man I once believed would be my safe harbor forever. What truly took my breath away was the last line of the email. "Oh, and I'm taking the RV that was delivered last week. It's under your name, you'll figure it out, right?" My entire body turned cold. The RV, worth nearly $42,000, was something we planned to use for weekend family trips, a small dream we'd saved for over the years, but because Chad's credit score was too poor, I was the only one who could qualify for the loan. Now, not only had he run off with another woman, he'd brazenly taken the vehicle in my name, leaving me buried under a massive debt, like one final insult. I called Chad immediately, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and despair. "Is this a joke? Chad, please tell me this is some kind of awful prank." His voice came through the phone, cold and distant. "Val, you've always been the resourceful one. I... I can't live a lie anymore. She makes me feel alive. I didn't plan to leave you like this, but things got serious. I'll send over the divorce papers. Goodbye." Then he hung up. Not a single apology. Not one word asking about Ethan. Not even a flicker of regret. I sat frozen in front of my computer screen. The bustling office around me felt like another universe, detached from the wreckage unraveling inside my chest. Ethan. How would I even begin to tell him? That evening, after forcing myself to cook a simple spaghetti dinner, Ethan's favorite, I sat across from him in silence as he ate. My son, only 10, had always been strangely sensitive and intelligent beyond his years. "Mom, why aren't you eating? Are you feeling sick?" I startled and forced a weak smile, trying to brush it off. "I'm just a bit tired, probably overworked today." Ethan put down his fork, looked at me for a long time, then quietly said something that shattered me. "You're sad about Dad, aren't you? He hasn't been home for 2 days. You don't have to hide it." I couldn't hold back the tears. In that moment, I realized I could carry the debt. I could endure the betrayal. But I couldn't lie to my son, the only person left in my world who still saw me whole. I pulled Ethan into my arms and whispered, "You're right, sweetheart. Dad has left the house, and he might not be coming back." He didn't cry. He just stayed quietly in my embrace and softly said, "I figured, but don't worry, Mom. I'm not going to let you go through this alone." That was the moment I knew. Despite the betrayal, despite the overwhelming burden, I wasn't truly alone. And in that very moment, a faint but real spark of hope began to rise within me, thanks to Ethan. After that night, I moved like a ghost. Each morning, I still drove Ethan to school and headed to the office, but my mind was completely blank, the once familiar spreadsheets and numbers blurred together like tangled wires. I stared at the screen, not understanding what I was even doing. I tried to smile, tried to nod at my coworkers, but their eyes were filled with concern. Sometimes I overheard murmurs behind my back. "Valentina looks like she's wasting away. Heard her husband left her for some younger woman. Poor thing, and that RV's in her name, right?" Those words pierced like needles. I didn't blame them. They didn't know I was carrying debt, holding it together as a mother, and pretending I was still okay. On the 8th day after Chad left, I was standing in the conference room when everything went black. The walls spun and disappeared. When I opened my eyes again, the sterile white ceiling of the hospital stared back at me. A gentle nurse leaned over and said, "Ms. Valentina, you fainted due to severe exhaustion and low blood pressure. The doctor needs to keep you here for further observation." I nodded slightly, but tears streamed down my face. 3 days later, the doctor informed me that I had a tumor that needed to be operated on soon. It could be benign, but there was no way to be sure without surgery. My heart felt like it was being crushed. I was only 38 years old. I couldn't collapse. I still had Ethan. I hadn't taught him how to tie a tie yet. I hadn't taken him to his first concert. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Yet that night, in the stark white hospital room, I cried like a child. Not out of fear, but from sheer helplessness. I couldn't work, couldn't pay off the debt, couldn't care for my son. I had become a burden in every sense of the word. On the fourth day, Ethan was brought to the hospital by his teacher. The moment he saw me, he rushed to the bedside, face pale and panicked. Are you okay? Please, don't leave me, Mom." I tried to hold back my tears and smiled. "Of course not, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I just need a little rest." Ethan held my hand, saying nothing, just sitting silently. The look in his eyes hurt more than the surgery I was about to face. The operation took place a week later. Everything went better than expected. I stayed in the hospital for another 8 days for monitoring before I was discharged. I returned home on a chilly Sunday morning at the start of spring. A cold breeze swept through the backyard. The maple trees hadn't budded yet. Ethan opened the door and helped me inside with the maturity of a much older boy. I sat down on the sofa, reached for my wallet, and checked my savings account. It wasn't much, but it was the money I had saved before marrying Chad, just in case something went wrong. I logged into my bank account. My eyes widened. Account balance, $16.44. I checked 3 times. It was the right savings account. The same account I had carefully put money into every single month for over a decade. Nearly $20,000. Now, barely more than $10. My heart sank, cold and hollow. I opened the transaction history. During the time I was hospitalized, there had been a string of withdrawals. The person who made them was Chad. Somehow, he still remembered the secondary password on the account. The one I'd mentioned when we set up a joint account 4 years ago. I was foolish enough to never change it. He hadn't just taken the RV. He had drained the only money I had left in my life. I leaned back into the couch. The tears came again, uncontrollably. Ethan ran in from the kitchen, placing a cup of hot milk on the table. Seeing me frozen, he looked alarmed. "Mom, what happened? Are you feeling sick again?" I shook my head. I didn't want him to worry, but my voice cracked. "Sweetheart, your dad took all the money from my account. I really have nothing left." Ethan didn't say a word. He just sat next to me and gripped my hand tightly. A moment later, he spoke, soft but determined. "You don't have to worry, Mom. I'll help you. Maybe I can't do much, but I'll find a way, I promise." I sat there in a cold and empty house, but inside me flickered a tiny, very real light. My son, Ethan, was the reason I wouldn't give up. 3 days after learning Chad had wiped out the savings I'd built over many years, I entered a state of numbness. It wasn't grief anymore. It was a strange coldness, like I was watching someone else's life unravel, not my own. I had no idea where to start. The money was gone. I had to pause work because of my health. And the RV loan was still being deducted every month, even though the vehicle was no longer in my hands. That night, as I quietly wiped down the dinner table, I looked over at Ethan sitting by the window with his old iPad. His eyes were fixed on the screen, fingers scrolling quickly. I asked softly, "What game are you playing?" Ethan looked up, eyes gleaming with something unusual. "It's not a game, Mom. I'm checking Dad's GPS." I froze, like I'd been struck by lightning. "GPS? What do you mean?" Ethan set the iPad down, sat up straight, and spoke in a serious tone that didn't sound like a 10-year-old at all. "Do you remember last month when we went hiking at Bear Peak? I pretended to get lost so you would buy me a GPS watch with a SIM card. Dad installed a tracking app on his phone to keep tabs on me, but..." I installed one back and synced his phone's access to my iPad. My eyes widened. You mean you can track Dad? Exactly. And guess what? Yesterday he stopped near Eldora Lake Park. There's a campsite there. He's still at the same spot tonight. I didn't know whether to be shocked or impressed. My 10-year-old son Ethan was conducting a stakeout with frightening precision. But even if we know where he is, what good does that do? Your dad won't just confess. I sighed. Ethan said nothing. He pulled a small, handheld device with a built-in microphone out of his backpack. Remember when I went to that STEM tech camp over the summer? They taught us how to make remote audio recorders. I've got it ready. You just need to drive me close to the GPS location. I'll handle the rest. I was nearly speechless. My son, still in 5th grade, still the same kid who used to sleep clutching a teddy bear, was now laying out a plan like a miniature detective. I stared at Ethan for a long moment, and strangely, I didn't feel anxious. What I felt was something else, a strange mixture of pride, heartbreak, and awe. I nodded. All right, we'll follow your plan. The next day, I pretended to call an old friend and spoke loud enough for Ethan to hear. I've got to meet up with a friend tonight in the next town over. Might be home a little late, okay? We drove down Highway 119, then turned into the thick pine woods leading toward Eldora Lake, where Chad was staying. It was close to 7 p.m., the air crisp, and the sun had dipped behind the rocky hills. Ethan clutched the recorder, wore his knit beanie, zipped up an old gray hoodie, and disappeared silently behind the trees. I sat in the car, heart pounding like a drum. My hands trembled around the steering wheel. I had never felt so small and so powerful at the same time. About 20 minutes later, the car door opened. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat, buckled up, and looked at me. It's done, Mom. I didn't ask any more questions. We drove away quietly, like two shadows slipping back into the night. Back home, Ethan connected the device to the laptop and played the audio file. The voices came through crystal clear. Chad, I still think this is reckless. What if your wife actually goes to the cops? A woman's voice said. She won't. Valentina's always been weak. She wouldn't dare. And the RV's under her name, so I've got every right to drive it. As for the account? Yeah, I've had the password forever, just hadn't gotten around to withdrawing until now. Chad's tone was disturbingly casual. But what if the kid finds out? That Ethan boy? He's in 5th grade. What would he know? Just as clueless as his mom. Chad let out a smug chuckle. I clenched my fists. My entire body trembled. Not from fear, but from certainty. It was time to fight back. I turned to Ethan and whispered, So, what do we do next? Ethan smiled faintly, like he had this all figured out from the start. Let me help you get everything back, Mom. Dad thinks I don't know anything, but I've been watching. I remember everything he did wrong. In that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. I had an ally, and it was my son. The next day, I walked into the Nederland police station, holding a copy of the RV registration, the purchase invoice, and documentation proving the loan was in my name. I looked the desk officer in the eye and said clearly, My RV was taken by my ex-husband without permission. I'd like to report a theft. The officer, a middle-aged woman named Darla, carefully reviewed the documents, then nodded. Since you two have already filed for divorce and the vehicle is registered in your name, this can be considered unauthorized use of personal property. We'll send someone to verify the location you provided. I handed over the GPS coordinates that Ethan had tracked. Darla called a patrol unit stationed near the campground by Eldora Lake. About 3 hours later, my phone rang. On the other end was a young officer. We're on site. The vehicle matches the description. A man named Chad and a woman are here. They seemed nervous when we asked for documentation. Can you come verify it in person? I turned to Ethan and asked, You ready? He nodded. I'm always ready. We arrived at the campsite as the sun was beginning to set. The officers were still there, along with Chad, arms crossed, standing beside the RV looking pale, and a young woman I'd never seen before. She wore a tight-fitting tank top, her blonde hair tied in a high ponytail, and was loudly insisting to the police that this is just a family misunderstanding. I walked up and held out my hand to the officer. This vehicle belongs to me. I'd like to take it back immediately. Chad looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. Val, what are you doing? Why would you bring the cops here? I didn't bring anyone. I reported my stolen vehicle. They're just following procedure. The officer turned to Chad. Do you have any proof of ownership or authorization to use this vehicle? Chad stammered and scratched his head. I thought since I'm her ex-husband, I still had the right to use it. I replied coldly. You filed for divorce. We're nothing to each other now, and you took the vehicle without my consent. That's theft. The officer frowned slightly, then turned back to me. Would you like to reclaim the vehicle now? I nodded. And I'd like the keys handed over right here. Chad hesitated, looked around nervously, then finally pulled the keys from his coat pocket and placed them in my hand like a kid caught stealing candy. Just as I turned to leave, Ethan suddenly spoke up. Wait, what about my mom's money? The officer looked confused. What money? Ethan, completely unafraid, pointed directly at Chad. He emptied my mom's savings account while she was in the hospital, nearly $20,000. All eyes turned to Chad. His face turned bright red. That was shared money. I had a right. I let out a bitter laugh. That money was saved before I ever married you. And don't forget, you withdrew it from my sub-account, the one I told you to reset the password for, but you purposely memorized. That's theft. The officer began jotting down everything I said. Suddenly, the woman standing next to Chad jumped in. Come on, Valentina, don't make this bigger than it is. We're just trying to start over, and the baby I'm carrying needs peace. Ethan looked up, eyes narrowed. You're pregnant? She stroked her belly and nodded. 3 months along. Ethan furrowed his brows, pulled out his phone, and opened the calendar. 3 months? But you only started seeing my dad 2.5 months ago. I checked his company emails. You two met at the new employee welcome party on February 14th, and today's only the beginning of May. The woman fell silent. I took one step forward. Let me ask you directly, is that baby even Chad's? She gave a nervous laugh. That might be a little off, but there's no need to verify that right now. I turned to the officer. If necessary, I can request a full investigation into the misuse of property and financial fraud. I'm also ready to take this to court. The officer nodded. You absolutely have the right to do that. Chad's face turned ashen. Val, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, but please, don't press charges. I'll return the money, I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I looked him straight in the eyes. You will pay back every cent, not just the money, but the consequences of everything you've done. Ethan, still standing quietly beside me, spoke in a voice soft but sharp as a blade. A real father doesn't leave his son and wife with a burden and say, figure it out on your own. No one said anything after that. Only the sound of wind passing through the pine trees remained, cold and eerily silent. Chad collapsed onto a wooden bench near the grass, head in his hands, speechless. As for the blonde woman, whom I now knew was named Haley, she turned away sharply, covering her face as if trying to escape everyone's gaze. Everything that had just been said was like a shattered mirror, reflecting every crack in the mask they had both worn for so long. I stood there, not angry anymore, just hollow, ice cold. But Ethan, my son, stood tall, eyes unwavering and filled with resolve. Dad, I have something to say. Chad looked up, stammering. Ethan, Ethan didn't let him finish. I know you took the money. I know you planned to sell the RV. I heard everything during that conversation at the campsite. But do you know when I found all of this out? Chad swallowed hard, silent. Ethan continued calmly. That hike at Rocky Ridge? I purposely separated from Mom and pretended to be lost. It was the only way she'd buy me that GPS watch. I wanted to track you because even back then I could feel something was wrong. I couldn't just sit back and watch mom exhaust herself every day because she trusted the wrong person. I turned to look at my son. For the first time in my life, I didn't know whether to cry or just hug him tightly because I was so proud. A 10-year-old who had built his own plan, tracked, recorded, and then exposed the man he once admired. Chad looked like he had been hit by a truck. He dropped his head. I'm sorry. Val, Ethan, I never imagined it would go this far. I was weak. I just wanted to start fresh with someone who made me feel alive. But then I cut him off. But then you emptied my account, tried to sell the only asset still under my name, abandoned your son without a word, and ran off with a woman you barely knew for 3 months? That's your version of living your truth? The air around us grew heavy with tension. Suddenly, in the distance, a silver SUV sped into the parking lot next to the campground. The door swung open. A middle-aged couple stepped out, their faces flushed red with fury. Haley immediately stepped back in panic. No, why are they here? I looked at her and gave a small smile. Because I called them. Haley's mouth dropped open. You did what? Back when I was in the hospital, Ethan went through Chad's email history and found the name of his former workplace. There, he met one of Chad's coworkers and learned that you, Haley, once listed your temporary address as your parents' house, and Ethan went and found them. Haley froze, lips trembling. Mom? Dad? Why? A middle-aged woman, presumably Haley's mother, spoke through gritted teeth. We need to talk, now. Haley's father turned directly to Chad and shouted, What kind of man tricks his own wife and child then drags my daughter into this filthy mess? Haley tried to stay calm. I just wanted to be happy. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. Her father looked at her coldly. Pregnant by a stranger, then trying to pin it on a man with a wife and kid? Is that the kind of happiness you want? Is that what we raised you for, Haley? She opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't form the words. In the end, she just bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. I didn't feel triumphant, just relieved. Not because the other woman got scolded, but because Ethan no longer had to carry all the weight of injustice alone. He did the right thing, and now he was protected by the truth. That night, after returning home, I opened my laptop and submitted a formal request to my lawyer to file charges against Chad for misappropriating personal property. I attached all the evidence: GPS data, recordings, and bank transaction confirmations. 1 week later, the court ruled that Chad had to return the $19,850 he withdrew illegally, and he was ordered to pay $600 per month in child support. If he failed to comply within 18 months, the payments would be automatically deducted from his salary at his new job, which, ironically, was a job I had helped him get through an old contact just to ensure his income stream wouldn't be interrupted. I also sold the RV for nearly $36,000, enough to pay off the loan and cover the remaining hospital bills. The day the deal closed, I sat in a small cafe near home while Ethan sat beside me doing his homework. I asked him, If it weren't for you, I don't know how I would have made it through. Ethan smiled and looked up. You're already a superhero, Mom. You just haven't figured out how to fly yet. I laughed and cried. And this time, I didn't wipe the tears away. 3 months after filing the lawsuit against Chad and selling the RV, our lives finally found a steady rhythm again. No more sleepless nights worrying about debt. No more mental torment from betrayal. No more cold dinners eaten in strange silence. Instead, we had breakfast with slightly burnt pancakes from Ethan's first attempt. Soft jazz played in our tiny kitchen while I watered the plants, and my son beamed with pride, showing me a report card with 3 A's. My lawyer, Lois, a sharp-witted woman from Texas, helped me work with the court to finalize a civil settlement with Chad. He was required to pay back the $19,850 within 2 years, with $1,200 per month automatically deducted from his paycheck, a portion of which was wired directly into my account. Ironically, I was the one who called Timberline Lumber Mill, where I'd done their books last year, and recommended Chad for a position. Not out of kinness, but to make sure every penny he owed landed in my hands, on time, down to the last cent. As for Haley, after being disowned by her parents and forced to leave their home, she cut ties with Chad. Word is, she's staying with a friend in another state, waiting to have the baby. I don't concern myself with her anymore. You reap what you sow. The RV was finally sold. I used the proceeds to pay off the loan and settle the hospital bills. Seeing my bank balance stabilize felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. My health improved quickly, partly due to following my treatment plan, and partly because I no longer had to brace myself for survival every single day. Each morning, I walked the loop at the park near our house, breathed in fresh air, and listened to my body, something I had neglected for over a decade of marriage. Ethan changed the most. He was no longer the quiet boy who froze when his parents argued. He was no longer the timid child afraid of being left behind. He became a young man who did the dishes without being asked, who checked my doctor's appointment reminders, and who even left me sticky notes like, "Don't skip breakfast, Mom. Stop overthinking. You're doing better than you think. I believe in you." One evening while I was folding laundry, Ethan walked into my room holding an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "STEM Summer Scholarship. They accepted my application. Remember I once said I wanted to learn how to build robots?" I nodded, overwhelmed, and hugged him tight. Of all the things Chad tried to take from me, my money, my confidence, my health, what he could never touch was my son's dreams and future. One weekend afternoon, I sat on the wooden chair on our porch, holding a cup of hot tea, eyes gazing at the maple trees budding after a long winter. Ethan was tending to a small tomato plant I'd started. I blurted out, "Ethan, you know what? Despite everything, I never regretted fighting." Ethan didn't look up. He just smiled. "That's because you're a warrior, and I'm proud to be your son." I stayed quiet. Yes, I was once a betrayed wife. A woman broken by illness. A mother who thought she had lost everything. But now, I am Valentina. Someone who stood up, who faced the storm, and who dared to begin again. Not for revenge, but to live in a way that honors the love of a 10-year-old boy who believed in his mother even when she couldn't believe in herself. Valentina's story is a powerful reminder that even when betrayed, deceived, and pushed to the edge of despair, a woman can rise, protect her child, and reclaim justice. With her son's intelligence and courage, she not only turned the tables, but rebuilt her life with strength and dignity. Sometimes, rock bottom is where we wake up and rise stronger, wiser, and more self-loving than ever. What do you think of Valentina's journey and Ethan's incredible growth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories that resonate with real life.